Good afternoon. Welcome to the webcast from the Biblical Files of Dr. Mike. I am your host, Dr. Mike. We are continuing our series, Women in the Bible, and today our topic will be on Michal. Michal, who was the daughter of Saul, Michal, who was the first wife of David, Michal, who was the wife of Patiel, and Michal, who was the first and third wife of David. Our biblical source comes from 1 Samuel 18th chapter verses 1 through 19 and verse 17, as well as 2 Samuel chapter 25 verse 44, chapter 3 verse 6 through 16, and chapter 6 verse 1 through 23. Quite a few verses to cover, and I didn't even put in First Chronicles there. Well, what's the difference between First Samuel and Second Samuel? First Samuel introduces the monarchy of Israel, and Second Samuel chronicles the establishment of the dynasty of David and the expansion of Israel under God's chosen leader, man after God's own heart. The book opens as David learns of Saul's death. Second Samuel at a glance, well, it is a record of the 40-year reign of King David, much of it, 33 years of it, from Israel's new capital in Jerusalem, into which city he would bring the Ark of the Covenant. The account also describes God's special promise to the king, and that is the covenant or the Davidic covenant of David, the birth of Solomon, the terrible moral failures of David, and the tragic divine punishment that followed. The bottom line, God's chosen man, David, rules from God's chosen city, Jerusalem. But what will happen now? In essence, Second Samuel records for us both the triumphs and the tragedies which will follow. Most of Israel's beautiful psalms were written during this particular time. As First Samuel begins, Israel was at a low point spiritually. The priesthood was corrupt. The Ark of the Covenant was not in the tabernacle. Adultery was practiced, and the judges were dishonest. Through the influence of godly Samuel and David, these conditions were reversed. Second Samuel concludes with the anger of the Lord being withdrawn from Israel. That particular verse is 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 25. The author of the book of 2 Samuel, well, those would be the three from 1 Samuel. And that book is it is a book that is in the Hebrew Bible, and in the Greek version of the Bible, the book was divided into two. Originally, it was one book. Although the book does not name a specific author, the material was compiled and documented by and collected by the prophet Nathan, Gad, and Samuel, for whom it is named. Well, we sort of answered the question, but let's take a look at where we are time-wise. Second Samuel is set in the land of Israel during the reign of David, and it follows the course of his 40 years as king, from 1011 to 971 BC. But why is the book important? Well, First Samuel, as we said earlier, introduces the king rule, the monarchy of Israel, and Second Samuel chronicles the establishment of Israel per se as God had dictated. Well, the book opens and David is lamenting the death of Saul and of Jonathan. And David's unlikely best friend is Jonathan. And it demonstrates David's personal grief over both of their deaths. The Lord soon set David over the tribe of Judah and then over all of Israel, and he anointed him king, uniting all 12 tribes into a tight-knit nation. The first 10 chapters of 2 Samuel show David as victorious in battle, praised by the people, compassionate to the sick and the poor, and righteous in God's sight. We see David dance before the Lord in the streets of Jerusalem as his men brought the Ark of the Covenant back home. That's in the 6th chapter, verses 12 through 16. We also meet the crippled son of Jonathan, um, to whom David extended grace for the sake of his father Jonathan, and that's in the 9th chapter, 7th verse. Yet, biblical writers did not overlook the hero's flaws. So, in the chapters that follow, we will note that David engaged in adultery with Bathsheba. We're not talking about her today, but he did. Was followed by a series of tragedies. That child's death. That's the 12th chapter, 18th verse. David's daughter Tamar is raped by his son Amnon, and Amnon is murdered by his brother Absalom and the subsequent death of Absalom. Despite the turmoil of all these years, David enjoyed the Lord's favor because the Lord forgave him. He confessed his sin, he was genuinely sorrow, and his confession was followed by regret of his sins, and he revealed his repentant heart um, in a way which pleased the Lord. So we've talked about some of the key events that we have. Well, the purpose of this book, Second Samuel, it is to show that the true King of Israel, who will finally establish the kingdom of God forever, will be the coming son of David, from whom the covenant will favor of the Lord, and it will never depart from them. We're looking at Second Samuel, 7th chapter, verses 12 and 16. There are so many things, but we will stay with at least three major ones. So the key to understanding this particular biblical record can be found in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 16. Just alluded to it. Your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever. And this was a divine promise that was made by God to regarding David. And the additional covenant was called the Davidic covenant, or the covenant of David, in which God promised an eternal throne in the house of David, out of which Jesus Christ does come. Sin would be punished, but David's line would never be completely cut off. As we talk about Michal here, you'll notice that she becomes the end of the line from the house of Saul. There is another verse, 2 Samuel, that can be used, and let's take a look at it. Now, O Lord God, you are God, and your words are truth, and you have promised this good thing to your servant. That's 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 28. There are four predominant theological themes in 1st and 2nd Samuel. I had to include them both because they sort of overlap. The first is the covenant with David, and the books are literally framed by two references to the anointed king in the prayer of Hannah, which is 1 Samuel 2nd chapter verse 10, and the Song of David, which is 2 Samuel 22nd chapter verse 51. This is a reference to the Messiah, the King, who will triumph over the nations who are opposed to God. And we can go all the way back to Genesis chapter 49, verses 8 through 12, and Numbers chapter 24, verses 7 through 9, and then 17 through 19. Now, according to the Lord's promise, this Messiah would come out of the house and be on the throne forever. The second theme is the sovereignty of God, which is clearly seen in both Samuel 1 and Samuel 2. One of these is the birth of Samuel. That's with Hannah and her prayers. We have the relationship to David that Samuel the prophet had. He was both the mentor as well as a prophet. And David was really taken by his death. We talked about it a little earlier. And the third one is the work of the Holy Spirit in empowering men for divine appointment tasks, which is evident. Um, that Holy Spirit has to be there to empower. It doesn't. Saul was empowered, but he lost favor. He did things that were not pleasing. Did many things that were not. So the Holy Spirit, the power of the Holy Spirit brought forth prophecy and victory in battle. And the fourth uh, theme is, in both books, it demonstrates the personal and the national effects of sin. The sins of Eli and his sons resulted in their deaths. We can go on. And the lack of reverence for the Ark of the Covenant led to the death of many of the Israelites who actually touched who were not supposed to touch. And it was really not a good thing. Well, Saul's disobedience resulted in the Lord's judgment, and he was rejected as king over Israel. Although David was forgiven his sin of adultery and murder after his confession, which is 2 Samuel chapter 12:13, he still suffered the inevitable and devastating consequences of his sin. David did many things, but when you look like we are today, starting with we started last time with Abigail, but his relationships and inner workings of his family are some things that need to be, that he could have worked hard on. The settings, we've already talked about Jerusalem. That's David's capital city during his final 33 years of reign. But before we had Hebron, which is where he was with Abigail. And then we had Baal Judah, is a city where the ark was resting. And David had it, after his victory, it was returned to um, Jerusalem. And there are so many. The characters here are numerous. We have David, who can easily be identified simply as the second king, who was crowned by following Saul's death. We have Abner, who was David's military commander, who attempted to keep power by supporting the dead king's son. We have Joab, who was David's cruel military commander. I should explain the use of cruel. Then there's Michal, David's first wife, who was chastened by her husband for ridiculing his devotional, his outplay of devotion to God. We can go on, and we will as we take a look in First and Second King, because some of the characters, new characters, are introduced, and some of these will continue. The vocabulary, the most important word that we have to deal with is the Davidic covenant, and we're looking at 2 Samuel 7, we've read it before. It is really the high point of both books, 1st and 2nd Samuel. In verses 1 through 17, we have the establishment of the covenant, the final and most clear administration or revelation of the covenant of grace in the Old Testament. Here we learn that the line of the seed of the woman referred to back in Genesis 3rd chapter, verse 15, as the one who will someday crush the head of the serpent, a line that has been traced from Seth to Abraham and then on to Judah, and is now narrowed and it is sharpened, and that seed of promise will come from this royal line of David. I keep saying that, but it's important because the situation that we're talking about, the first marriage today, the first and third marriage today, will come from the seed. There was no seed with Micah, and we'll talk about that. And this promise is ultimately fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. So, as we go through, that covenant is that agreement um, that's made go back and remember we had the covenant at Sinai. Um, we've had the covenant with Noah. We have had all these, but we get down to this one, it becomes really important. With reference to those covenants, we can we can look at the Lord's revelation. The covenant of grace first revealed to Adam. That's back in Genesis 3:15. That's the earlier quote. And then to Noah in Genesis 9. And then to Abraham, Genesis 12:15 and 17. And then Moses, the Mosaic covenant, Exodus 24, Deuteronomy. It goes on. So, in contrast to the other covenants, regarding including the covenant with David, the Mosaic covenant, the administration, covenant of grace is included in the work principle. And this work principle is important for Israel, because God is blessing them. He's blessed them in so many ways, led them out of bondage in through the wilderness into the promised land. He's done all those things for them. But and we saw what happened in the book of Judges. So now things are better. We have a king, a man who wants to follow what God has asked him to do. Now, you would think it would be overly apparent that with this covenant, the covenant of grace, it would make explicit the fact that the salvation that God had given the people will be full of grace from the start to finish. Now that's what we think, and that's in Ephesians 2nd chapter 8 9 verse. But we are human, and we too will sin. So it had a permanent house, and to me, a permanent display when it was returned to Jerusalem. So thus the chapter is structured to show how we are to receive the promises of God for our salvation, namely that God reveals them as in 2 Samuel, here we go again with the 7th chapter, verses 1 through 17, and all that is left for us to do is to respond in thanks and praise. And those exact words are found in chapter 7, verses 18 through 29. Now, we have to take a look at the problem here. And this is not really a problem, but it is a way of looking at a woman in the Bible. And we're going to take a look at Julia Hogan, who did a critical comparison of Michal, Bathsheba, and Tamar from 1st and 2nd Samuel. Now, the idea was that that the three women shared so many things in common, and to be honest with you, this particular author says that the suffering that they experienced was brought about primarily through the actions of both King David and the narrator of the book. The narrator is part of the cast here, actually part of those names that I should have read as characters. So they suffer because of the way the narrator has written the book, and the book is about King David. Our focus, however, is not about King David, it is on Michal. So let's start looking at what we have here as this particular woman. Here, the woman is used simply as a means of continuing and explaining the events that happen in the plot of 1st and 2nd Samuel regarding David's story. Now, there are two phrases you will hear: David's story, David's women. But the focus I really want is on the one. It would be the aim to bring Michal's experiences to the forefront as we uncover what has been commonly called her lost voice. There's only one time that a couple of times that she actually speaks out, and when she does, to me, it's quite surprising and rewarding. But that is what we want to look at. We want to look at why she does that and how it's done. We will be looking a great deal through the feminist lens today, and we will be suspicious of some of the writings and the stories that are given. We have to realize that there are three common themes that uh, Michal has to go through. And looking at her portrait, we can see how they are demonstrated throughout the narrative. And again, they are used to unite David's women. So the idea that in the Bible these women are put in the narrative just to move the quote unquote main character along. But what we look at and what we discover is if we read very closely, we will find out that the experiences that Michal had, so in many ways, that's an ancient Hebrew lit, are very contemporary in society today. In fact, we've just had a professional athlete expound on what he felt was the role of the woman in society. Let's take a look at some other things. The experience here shows that the biblical women are described. They are highly sensitive personnel, and they are um, very personal regarding the situations that they have. But here are those themes that we need to look at: childbearing, barrenness, unable to have children, marital problems, sexuality, and sexual abuse. They are broken down rather than one, two, three. You're going to be one who has children, which will make the husband happy, and according to some narratives, that's your task, or you will be barren. You will have marital problems, or you will have a good life. You will sexuality will be involved, or there will be sexual abuse. So we have those captions, we have those umbrellas that the narrator of the book of Samuel, and I cannot say whether Samuel Gad or um, who wrote it, but that's what happens. So when they write in a negative way, it becomes damaging to women. So the term David's women will be inclusive of those that you know, Abigail, Bathsheba, Tamar, uh, those that you know, but there are so many others that are not, whose stories were not important enough for the narrators to include here. But David's women will be an inclusive term that we will use as we go through and look at David's story and his life as first the person who would be king and then the person who became king. So, interesting note: David's mother's name is not given in this narrative, but his father's name and his brother's names are given. His sisters are mentioned in passing, usually in a genealogical way when the chronicles are written according to who is related to the other persons. There are names of wives, there are names of concubines that are not included here. If they are just under that umbrella of David's women. So let's take a look at Micah. Micah is really interesting because she is depicted in opposite poles. She is either depicted as a very passive woman, or she's depicted as an unsurly shrew. You know, she either had nothing to say or everything that she said was rude and not according to the standards. Interesting to note, when we discussed Abigail, we were able to tell you, and I will tell you again that we will not go into depth, but we will take a look at Proverbs 31, where that ideal woman, that ideal wife, the ideal mother is depicted. So we'll look at the construction of First and Second Samuel regarding Michal and King David, and we'll look at the negative impact that it can have if we see all women characters through this particular prism. But we are not going to do that. We're going to see her as a woman who is making her way through. One of the reasons I chose this one, and people always ask, why did you choose Michal? Well, so often I thought about the woman in the window, Michal is the woman in the window. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. She is. Now, she does have a hidden voice. She does. And her actions sometimes um, betray her silence as well as the clandestine thoughts that she has. So she would have been a woman who endured periods of great suffering, and she would have been involved in abuse um, that's mentioned, uh, but not in the sense that you normally would think of it as being an abusive situation. Let's go on a bit more. What we have is the fact that there's a failure to mention the reality of Mikhail's situation as she is represented by the narrator, almost as a deservingly desolate and barren woman who actually doesn't deserve to be mentioned. But if you want to take a look at the words desolate and barren in Scripture, go to 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 20 to 23. Michelle's character is doomed from the start, according to her role in the story that we are reading in 1st and 2nd Samuel. And she is used basically as a progression technique for David, who becomes the king. And much to her detriment, um, her character is changed tremendously. It should be wholly obvious that this is going to happen when you start reading, but you would like to see it done differently. So, first thing that we have here with Michal, we want to talk about those hidden verses. And secondly, we would like to see these women as individuals, as I said earlier, who suffered in both 1st and 2nd Samuel and who share a common bond around the same man. And with Michal being the first wife, although we talked about Abigail um, first, being the first wife, it therefore becomes realistic that this these experiences can be looked at through the word gaze, G-A-Z-E, location and transmission, and then sexual violence. So we'll look at the character of Michal through those three lenses today. Um, you have a sense that Michal becomes no longer needed at some point, and she just decides that she's going to be quiet about the situation. But as one of David's women, that is not going to happen. That is not something that is going to happen regarding her place in society. She also has the problem of being um, a woman whose character itself, now we're talking about her actions, are polar opposites too. She's blamed for being strong and masculine at some points, and she is blamed for being feminine at others. So it's a very difficult situation for the character of Michal. You know, is it okay that I do this, and then is it okay if I do that? But in either case, scholars have blamed her on either end. So the perception of Michal, and we'll start with that gender part, has been damaged through the lens in which the male writers have portrayed her. They look at her morality from within, and they look at how it presents the life of royalty at that time, as well as the role of women. So what we have here is a narrative which does not promote the patriarchal system, but it does when you start assigning masculine roles, which are given to the men, and the feminine roles, which are less dominant, and in many cases totally left out or not considered important enough to be included. So we have what's called a narrative agenda, which is what we've been talking about. And within that narrative agenda, we have to understand that within the Hebrew Bible, there are many patriarchal stories, and the story of Michal is one of them. And so many people will look at it even today and say, this is the way it should be. There's one more thing that we need to mention, the image of the woman as an other. That's the word, O-T-H-E, other, O-T-H-E-R. So this is a woman who is not a wife or could be a wife, a mother, but she doesn't quite fit in either. She becomes the other. And Michal, in many cases, has been portrayed as an other. So if we look in Proverbs, mentioned it a little bit earlier, we look in Proverbs 1 through 9, and it's dedicated to the dangers of those other women who can pose to the safety of the men around them in their social order, and they are always depicted as being highly sexualized, and in many cases, foreign women. We're putting these stereotypes on them, okay, and they become a threat. They weaken what was quote unquote the sexual nature within the confines of what was given to them. They come in and destroy. There is a passage in Proverbs where Bathsheba is talking to Solomon, and he's warning her against the foreign women. And one of the things he does when he grows up is immediately go out and do the wrong thing. Cheryl Exum wrote a book called Fragmented Women, in which she portrays Michal as one of those other women, but not the mother part because she isn't there. So, as a character of Michal, we have to see her as one that is within the plot, continuously within the plot, and she's even present in so much of the text. But she's used to explain both the political and the theological themes in both Book 1 of Samuel and Book 2 of Samuel. You also have to understand that the character of Michal is painted as a victim within the narrative agenda. She is a victim. She is discussed and treated uh, as a character who is weak. I am not saying I agree with that, but we'll take a look at what some of the scholars have said. So her character is that of victim is one who is victimized, and she must be presented in an appropriate way as a woman because she holds several interesting facts. One of the first being that she is the only woman, according to most scholars, to say that she loved a man in the Bible. That's not done. It's usually the man who does the pursuing, but she says that. And then, secondly, we have her watching David from the palace window in Second Samuel, as she learns to hate him, and actually she despises him in her heart, paraphrasing and quoting. So we talked about the opposite pose a little bit earlier, but she does say that she loves David at one point. That's at the beginning. That's in the beginning of the relationship. Actually, before they're married, before Saul gives her in marriage. But the hate comes at the end. And then there's punishment. So let's take a look at the change of heart and why it happened with her. So the narrative construction pulls it out of gender, and because she is more quote unquote masculine in character than feminine, we have to look at it. Now, for those of you who want to do notes, we have 1 Samuel 19th chapter, verses 8 and 17, 2 Samuel 3rd chapter, verses 12 through 16, and then we have Second Samuel 3rd 12 through 16, and then 2 Samuel 6, then 16 through 23. And this is where Michal is only presented, Michal is only presented or permitted to speak briskly on two occasions. On two occasions. And um, both of them happen to be the first and the last time we see her in the text. We hear her voice. It is no longer hidden. It is the voice of someone who has something to say. It becomes very important what she has to say, and it's not always understood or interpreted that way. In fact, there are documents written that Michal is one of the most misunderstood characters in the Bible. So, Michal is critical in establishing um, the idea that her character is in danger and that she has to follow, quote unquote, the rules in order to be safe. And because as a female, as a woman, she has to have that protection from the patriarchal side. And in Michal's case, she is in between her father and her husband. So as a young man, David uh, was a threat to Saul, and Saul was constantly looking for a way to outdo him. And he has the older daughter, Merab, and then he has the younger one, Michal. So it is the older daughter who was betrothed to David, but we know right away something's going to be wrong. So Saul instead gives her in marriage to Adriel, and that's 1 Samuel 18 chapter 19 verse. It's important that we remember that he's already not keeping his promise. So Saul's daughter, Michal, as stated earlier, is in love and has no qualms about letting everybody know that she's in love with David. So for Saul, the older daughter's marriage actually opens up a situation that is actually better for him. So he feels that if he can get David to become his son-in-law, then that will make it a little easier for him to carry out the threats that he has in mind. But that is not what happens. Not what happens. David is ambitious and he wants to be part of this family because it is the move that he feels he needs to do. So the political context of surrounding this marriage immediately makes it one known as a sort of a unwritten contract. It's a strategic move on Saul's behalf to have David married to his younger daughter. Now, please notice that I've not said a single thing about David being in love with Michal because he's not there. You can read it a couple of times, which I did, because I kept saying, there's no way that she could feel this. Her emotions could be this regarding David, and David not reciprocate in some way. You know, there should be some type of emotion. So Michal appears to be no exception to David's detachment when it comes to women. They are there, and there's affection usually on their part, but not necessarily on his part. Uh, it's not reciprocated, as we said a little bit earlier, and that silence becomes a situation that later breaks the back of that relationship. So in First Samuel, we see the plotting, we see the planning going on. So he is physically attempting to take David's life. Now, without going into detail, we know the story. The bride price was for him to bring 100 foreskins from the Philistines. Now, why 100? Well, Saul, according to the scholars, believe that in order to undertake this task, he had to put his life in danger and thereby getting himself killed. But David being David, he was ambitious, and he knew that he wanted to be married to Michal in order to elevate his political stature. And that's in, we're going back a minute to 1 Samuel 18 chapter verse 26. So he brings Saul with not 100 foreskins, he brings Saul 200 foreskins. So the marriage to Michal was the easiest way in which Saul could snare and kill David, he thought. So we get this and we're saying, okay, that sounds disgusting. That sounds awful, you know. But what we have is someone who's afraid of someone else. He feels threatened, and when one feels threatened, you tend to strike out. So Saul hoped that that would occur. It did not. So the marriage does occur, and David becomes the husband of Michal. Saul later sends messages. We got a lot of sending going on here. Sends messages for them to bring David to him. But what Michal does, and I feel badly for her because she's truly in the middle. She's truly in the middle. Sends a message for David to come, and so Michal understands what's going on, so she hides a bundle in the bed. Different authors describe it different ways as a tarpon, pretty much. She hides it, and she tells him David is asleep. But in this particular scene, we have the fact that she knows that her dad feels animosity towards him. And she basically tells him that you must go. You must go today. You must go tonight. Because tomorrow you may not be alive. Because her father has plans, and she's aware, and she tries to help. And by helping him escape, it appears that Michal's love for David inspires her to help him escape. So the actual quote is a beautiful little quote in there, and I believe it's found in 1 Samuel 19, chapter 11 verse. So despite the danger, because she has to make a decision right away, she has to make that decision whether she's going to be loyal to her father or loyal to her husband. Now, what she does, because there's urgency and suspense, and that's within the scene, and she actually lets him down through the window. But there is no passionate farewell between the couple. There's nothing, I'll see you, I'll miss you, none of that. She lets him down. And the situation she knows is going to be a volatile situation, but she's okay with the choice that she has made. She's okay with that. Now, David does not, there's no turning back and looking fondly, or, but she's thinking to herself that, he may come back, soon. Um, but it's not in the records. What we do have though, is while he's away, he acquires two more wives. One is Abigail, and the other is the wife of Saul. So we're going on as we move through. So she has put him out the window. I want you to remember the symbol of the window because it becomes very important as we go through talking about the woman in the window. So Michal is a woman in the window. So David does not come back to see Michal. He comes back. He comes back to see Jonathan, who is the brother of Michal. And it's a dangerous situation because he's in close proximity to the palace, and he stays hidden there for 3 days. But he does not ask about, nowhere in the records, he doesn't ask about Michal, nor does he ask about her well-being or safety or anything. But he came to see Jonathan because we have this masculine bond. And a lot of time and a lot of research has been spent on that. And it becomes okay. there's a competition, there's a rivalry between. They both love David. Jonathan loves David, and Michal loves David. But this is where we get deep into the gender rivalry. Is that a feminine love and or a masculine love that we have going on? And our task today is not to describe it because we're looking at the feminine love that Michal has for David. But we had to mention that he comes back to see Jonathan, someone he loved more than women, according to the scripture. As we go through here in the narrative, we find that Michal's character is still not fully formed. She still has those hidden voices. She's feeling abandoned by David. She's unaware that he has been within a stone's throw of her, but he didn't come to see her. And it's going to be a number of years before she comes. And she has shown her loyalty by choosing her husband instead of her father. She has done that. However, she is still living in her father's house because her husband is gone. What we have is the women in ancient Israel. Again, there were those roles that they had to play. And in this case, there's uh, disagreement over whether or not she chose the right thing. Did she affiliate herself with the wrong one? Considering the fact that David's a war hero, he's running and hiding from his father-in-law Saul. He's tempted a couple of times, but he doesn't kill him. Um, but she is just described as telling her father the reasons that she helped David escape is that David threatened to kill her. So that's in 1 Samuel 19, chapter 17 verse. Now, I don't know if that's true. I didn't find it textual wise, but it gives Saul some reason to accept Michal's lying to him. If I hadn't helped him escape, he would have killed me. But the truth is, she helped him escape because she loved him and out the window. But physically, she is not supposed to be strong and have those masculine tendons in order to help him down and for him to walk away in the darkness, as it were. But she does. And again, that's a negative, not a positive, but a negative, a very bad negative on her part, and it sort of messes quote unquote her characterization up because this is making her seem out of what she's supposed to be, out of that feminine existence, taking care of the household, depending on the patriarchal system to underwrite whatever she needs. So when she lets him down from the window and then proceeds to gain him time by lying to the messengers. Um, she's definitely made her decision as to how she wants to live her life. Now we had Abigail considered as quick-witted. Again, Michal here is considered as quick-witted, and you have the stories here, and we're still just staying in First and Second Solomon. You have other women in there who have been quick-witted and not impulsively. Well, yeah, acting without a great deal of thought, but doing the right thing that needed to be done. So Michal is more responsive to the emotional, but she has the physical ability to help him, not only now, because he still is a son-in-law to Saul, and he is a husband to Michal. And we'll notice how that language becomes important shortly, especially upon the death of Saul. So the one way that I can explain the Jonathan situation in the book of Samuel here is that Michal is often quoted as what? Falling in love with David, as in 1 Samuel 18 18th chapter, 20th verse. And Jonathan is loving David in Samuel 18 chapter verse 1 to 3, and again in 20 verse 17. So we have to conclude that Jonathan's love is a demonstration of that abiding love and everlasting passion for David that endures the test of time. Um, but it is interesting to compare the masculinity of Michal with that of David uh, relationship with Jonathan. And it is described as loving David like his own soul. And that again is in 1 Samuel 18 chapter. David in return risked his life to come back, and we talked about that, to tell him the robe. We may not have time to talk about the robe, the exchanging of robes, but the relationship that's depicted is in contrast to Michal. Basically, that's really the part I want you to remember as we go through that. And it is called obscure gender relationships because we have that demonstration that that David and Jonathan's relationship is that of comrades. Michal and David's relationship should have been that of husband wife, even in the political arena in which they existed. But they were the objects of, if David could use the word love, they were the objects of David's love. So Michal is presented here as being strong, but again, this is that strong, aggressive, physical characteristic that she had. Um, and that is something we want to remember as we go through. She placed herself in that difficult position, but it's important. Wilt also then finding difficulty to fulfill the role of the wife. So if she could be strong enough to take care of that situation, which required masculinity, what was her situation as a wife? She could not be a wife because David was not there. And I often say, okay, scholars, those of you who are complaining and writing different things, let's remember that he wasn't there. He was never there for her because he had gone out and he's hiding and he's engaging in warfare. So her behavior would be, that the masculine part would have not been acceptable to society. So at the window, while she's at the window, this is when you're seeing her in the window frame. 1 Samuel 19 and then 2 Samuel 6. We see her in the window frame, and that's how she's featured in the text. She's gazing out beyond the window frame. She's not outside, she's gazing out. So the window frame is symbolic of Michal's standing on the edge, being a marginal person in the text was women are often betrayed. She's away from the narrative, but she's still able to focus on David's story in 2 Samuel. She resides in a place and she sort of stays behind that window frame, but she is in her home, and more importantly, notably, she is one uh, on the inside. She's not on the outside, she's inside, and she's trying to adhere to what she's supposed to do as a woman. A woman's place is to remain in the household and take care and be a good wife and demonstrate her ability to run the household effectively, to raise her husband's children, and to bring honor to her husband. You've heard that before. And that honor was to be brought through the efficiency and the obedience in which she carries out the task. And here we are in Proverbs 31, verses 10 through 31. It was considered a tribute of a good wife to be able to do these things and not nag the husband. And here we get our first accusation that Michal nagged incessantly as she dishonored her husband's authority. We hear the wife who seems to fall within this nagging situation and is unfavorable. So once again, she watched David leave through the window, um, and that is that the man is going outside in the world. He's going into the outside space, and he's going to have freedom. She, on the other hand, has a boundary, which is the window, and she is not going to be able to go outside. She will not be able to enter into his domain, despite the strength that she has and how she has proven herself to be loyal to David. So crossing that boundary would bring tragedy for Michal as she tried to emphasize uh, how she felt in this voiceless situation she's placed in. So that imagery of her lowering David down to the ground so that the messengers can't catch him because Saul wants to kill him is in effect symbolic of birthing David, which would make her what? Would make her feminine, but David gets a new life through the momentary experience and freedom that has been denied Michal. So she has this feminine side, but it's not always recognized. So the role of the mother in that birthing situation with David is a way that she has a bit of freedom, but it's ironic because later she's condemned and she remains childish in the narrative for demonstrating her ability to do this masculine task. Second Samuel, we're looking at 6th chapter, verses 21 through 23. So she's given I believe, incorrectly masculine characteristics and condemned for being a female. At this point, Michal knows that David has deserted her, and in fact, she is given in marriage by Paul to Patiel. We're now with that second husband. He is apparently a good man. We're talking 2 Samuel 25, chapter 25, verse 44. And it's at least 7 years before David takes notice of Michal and Patiel and demands that Patiel return her to his house. And we'll look in 2 Samuel, 3rd chapter, verses 13 to 20. The marriage between Michal and Patiel may be regarded as being more of a political statement from Saul and an attack on David as an insult to him for removing him entirely from his household and thereby negating his claim to the throne through the symbolic widowing of Michal through her remarriage. Now, there are those scholars who say it was not a marriage because she had the marriage with David, which was a legitimate marriage. Saul was just basically, in today's vernacular, throwing shade. But he demanded her return, the return of his wife, you know. So it's David, wanted to demonstrate his legitimate claim as ruler of the kingdom. He married Saul's daughter, so now it is his kingdom. So he demanded that return. That's in 2 Samuel 3rd chapter, verses 12 through 16. And it's the only time she is pictured as being away from the window frame. She has to leave the window frame in order to go back to the palace to become the wife of David again. Please note, there's no passion noted in any of that situation. It is David's request once again, and we get this situation. He's sending for her, and she must come because she is caught in that space again that she doesn't want to be in. She's hemmed in again not by David and Saul, because it's Saul's action, but here she's hemmed in by being married to Patiel, who by all sources appear to have a great deal of affection for her and for a husband who has been away for 7 years. So she's presented in this scene um, with Patel as, as not able to express how she felt. Again, she's truly voiceless. So her voice is lost and is often recorded as she has her voice and is lost as if she's in the wilderness. She's lost among the deeds that the men in this patriarchal society have decided that she must do. Not if she wants to do because no one asked her, but it is a political agenda and she's surrounded by these men and she must do what she has been summoned to do. Um, in 2 Samuel, this is when 2 Samuel 6 chapter, this is where Michal started to hate David in her heart. Now, Patiel, the husband I've spoken very little of, is described as walking behind Michal weeping until Abner commands him to desist and to return home. And he did this in a very rude way. There are scholars who say he spoke to Patiel, Abner did, as you would speak to a dog, like go away. But Patel is depicted as being one who had an emotional and a loving relationship, and he cared deeply for Michal. But again, she has nothing to say. She is powerless. Um, he is Patel. He is presented as one who didn't say anything verbally or object to Kel's being taken away. Therefore, he is seen as quote unquote powerless and not masculine but feminine. He's not fighting for her. So the narrator, in his own way, depicts him as quote unquote displaying feminist characteristics. I also noticed in reading that Michael does not have any words or any volumes to say. She is volatile, obviously. She is seething with anger, a deep-seated anger, because here she is being pulled again, you know, she's been become a political strategic tool for both her dad and her husband. And we will get to the last time those two phrases are used, because when she's referred to as David's wife, that's one thing. When she's referred to as Saul's daughter, that becomes another. So we have Michal at this point trying to hold back and hide the hurt that she feels toward David for all the years that he simply abandoned her and left her fate up to her dad. She was a newly married woman when he left, and she feels outraged at David's behavior and calling her back to him after all the years for purely political reasons, which is to show basically everyone outside that he has the power to do this. It doesn't matter that he's confronting an estranged wife, but it's his desire, so he will do it. I want it, therefore I will do it, I will have it done. Now, is it lawful? Well, now we can go back to Leviticus. None of that has changed because she is, in fact, his wife. Uh, is he committing adultery? Again, we can go back. Is this, in fact, what is happening? Is it an illegitimate situation? Because David was not dead. He was just cut off from his family. In this case, meaning Michal, who is his wife. And Michal was given to Patel as punishment for helping David escape by her father Saul. Another interpretation that we have here in this particular instance We have the fact that what's happening here, this taking away, it becomes sort of prophetic of what's going to happen later in his affair with Bathsheba. You're taking away from someone who is actually happy, and you're taken away because you can just do that. You know, he sends for Michal. Okay, it's the same kind of thing that he did with Bathsheba. He sent for her. So in modern society, we would have trouble deciding whether legal, not legal, uh, but it's just one of those things. Is it a masculine act or a feminine act? You associate yourself, you are given a threat, how do you respond? And we're still at the window. We can skip very quickly over and take a look at Queen Jezebel, who was at the window. She was waiting, she was gazing out to watch what she thought would be her oncoming fate. We have the Levite concubine in Judges 19 and 21 who gets to the threshold of the house after being assaulted by the mob. We have the general in Judges 5, 28, 29, the unnamed general's mom who waits by the window, and she's looking through the lattice and she's awaiting what is in essence the arrival of a dead son. And in Proverbs 31, we have again the perfect wife who's at home, who's presiding over her duties and taking care of the welfare of her household, and she stays inside unless and with permission to go outside, which becomes an extension of her domestic duties. So the imagery of outside here is that for a woman alone, unfiltered, unaffiliated, and separate from a presiding male, it becomes more sinister and dangerous uh, than it should be. Proverbs 7 tells the story of the woman who goes out walking the streets alone looking for an unsuspecting male. As we go on with this, we have Abner, as we've mentioned, his behavior towards Patiel, and we've actually talked about Patiel as being depicted as someone who lacks courage or the ability to even speak out against the taking of Michal, which renders him a feminine character. So the next time Michal is mentioned in the narrative is in 2 Samuel 6, where Michal is now reunited with King David after having left behind her weeping husband Patiel, presumably forever. The reader finds Michal once more inside, and guess where she is? She's standing at the window frame, looking toward the outside as King David, who along with the whole multitude of Israel, and with 2 Samuel 6 chapter 19 verse, is enthusiastically celebrating the bringing of the ark of the Lord to the city of Jerusalem. This is the final scene between David and Michal. Instead of having the physical strength to lure David from the window, Michal is depicted as having the strength of character to step outside and challenge the king. She is no longer a hidden voice. She's no longer that voice from the wilderness that you can't hear. So, according to the text, Michal is witnessing the king's jubilant dancing, um, and he has uncovered himself before the eyes of the servant maids. And that's in verse 20. In other words, Michal is watching David through his vigorous dancing expose himself to everyone in the city who is close enough to see. He's wearing only an apron, according to the translation here. And Michal remains away from the celebration. Once more, she's gazing at David through the window, watching him as he proceeds to continue with a life which she now plays no part. She's allowed to watch him reveal himself to women that surround him, and they looking at all aspects of his body. And she basically says, "These are visions that should only be seen by my eyes, but that David is out, and he explains that he is just excited and enthused about having the ark home. But again, she is standing in isolation. She is feeling like that one who does not belong. And here we have her, Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out the window and saw King David leaping and dancing for the Lord. And she despised him in her heart. We've said it about 3 times here. And it is with this emotion that Michal brings up the courage to step outside and to confront her husband. Ideologically, the narrator places Michal in a different position. Now, before he's kept her, as a weak person, and now she is figuratively caught in a space that is between her as the wife of Yahweh's anointed King David and her being the daughter of the previous and unfavorable King Saul. The narrative demonstrates this awkward position of her character through her being depicted as standing alone upon the inside, away from the celebration and behind the window frame. And that language changed, and I'm sure you noticed she, she's not the wife of David. She's at this point being affiliated with Saul. Sort of a backtrack, as it were. She is being described as the daughter of Saul. However, her previous window scene, she was referred to as David's wife. So we have that I mentioned earlier that was going to happen. The affiliation, she's the last one in her family left. So basically, it is David that she has. She has no children. It's important to note that. So she feels ostracized in so many ways. So many ways she feels that she has been doomed into a house, and she just is not part of what's going on. She has this figurative space that she occupies that puts her in the isolated state. And she appears first as masculine, almost a soldier-like woman, when she lets him down, and then now she's sort of like falling apart. She's not able to step out. But when he comes into the house, she does confront him. She comes in, and here we get one of the theological agenda items in the text, in that Yahweh bequeathed that no descendant of Saul will ever sit upon the throne of Israel. Her character is used to establish David's position as king, and now within her final scene, she will be used once more by the narrative to demonstrate the final ending of Saul's lineage through the death of her character in the final scene. So it is through this death experience, death not meaning that she died, but all that was good inside her died. This death that we have here is essential that Michal has no children. We mentioned that earlier, and demands that no child will be part of that lineage. So we get David right on the verge of portraying her as an annoying hag who attempts to segregate Michal from David. And he succeeds in making Michal appear as that nag or that unsavory person in her stepping out to confront David. And then when she speaks, it portrays her as nothing more than a prattling woman that chastises her husband solely for his strong celebration of religious accomplishment. So she argues that what she suffers here is great violence in his hands, you know, and she's being robbed of her final moments, of a final character who has to explain to her husband how she feels about a lifetime of meeting the agendas, the political agendas, and technically the narrative agendas of the men that surround her. Michal is instead depicted as offering nothing more than sarcastic comments to David and is then immediately silenced and rebuked by him for the audacity she has shown at coming to reprimand him. For those of you who want to read it, take a look at 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 21 through 22. After the event, Michal is silenced forever within the rest of the narrative of King David, and Michal has no further, and she has no claim, no future on Israel, no prospect for life. Michal is dismissed by the narrative as a barren and hopeless woman, as a barren and hopeless woman. Now she has been used strategically as a character in order to benefit the greater story of David. And we understood from the beginning that David is the hero, he is the protagonist. But it is through Michal and his actions with Michal that he is given all of this acclaim. So when you describe Michal as taking offense at David's jubilant dancing, as exposing himself in front of the women that Michal refers to as servants and slave girls, you're focusing on her being solely left out because David is exposing himself in front of women that she deems beneath her. But she is also being considered as representing the old fashioned, outdated views of Saul's lineage. She has, quote unquote, a snobbishness towards David's alternative worship practice, towards the lower class women in the city who share the experience with him. And it's possible that she felt that because he had done something wrong in his eyes, but it is possible that nothing was done wrong in the eyes of Yahweh. Cheryl Exum goes on to discuss the passage of that we were talking about in 2 Samuel as a kind of situation where David gave over to the Merab's sons for execution. And in that way, Exum goes on to say, had, she uses the supposition, had Michal had children, would he have done the same thing? Don't know. We are not sure how that would have been done. But at one point only, she does uncover her lost voice, and she does speak, and she does try to uh, be the person that she would like to be. But she suffers the trauma of having these young boys taken away and for execution. Because it doesn't say they were forced, they were given away. So there are few women in the biblical narrative who are able to actually cross boundaries in what is called gender games, be both masculine and be feminine. And although she stands at the window twice, and she lowers him once, and then when she sees him dancing in the street, but she's able to uh, make her sarcastic remarks, and in a sense, she's jealous of her husband exposing himself to other people. Is the jealousy of Michal warranted? Well, you have to look at what has happened to her. Is this need for sexual jealousy something that is David's fault? It won't be written into this Hebrew narrative that's why. But she doesn't witness his exposure of himself in public in front of strange and unfamiliar women when she doesn't get to experience his body in any way. Let's take a quick look at Michal as if she were, if we were discussing her in comparison to uh, two others. And there are three main themes here. The gaze, the location and transmission, and sexual violence. We have that to take a look at. So we've talked about the gaze. Gaze basically means that he saw her. Okay, he did. He had seen Michal. He knew her, and it was fine because it suited his ambition. Okay, but in many ways, it prophesies is things that are going to come in the future for David. So, but Michal shares experiences with the other David women, and she is a gazer. She looked at him because remember, she says, she's enthralled with him basically. He's in love with her older sister, but she is in love, not in love, but he is betrothed to her older sister, but the younger sister is looking at him. So the secondary thing that comes after gazing, that looking and everything, it has to do with the location. Um, in this particular story, we have uh, brief moments in it where there is clarity. There is a sense of okay, these are both situations where they should understand and know the scriptures, but Michal is depicted in the narrative in both 1 and 2, Samuel 1 and 2, as gazing powerlessly at her estranged husband, you know, in the window frame behind the window. Um, she's described as one who watches David escape from the window and flee, remaining powerless to bring him back to her. It is in contrast to the situation we just talked about, where uh, this was where she let him down. Here we're talking about she confronts him when with the ark of God dancing in the street. David uses his gaze as a powerful gauge to possess people. Michal has problems just going out to confront him, but she does. So her gaze becomes one of condemnation because she doesn't quite understand what's going on. It does appear that there is a flaw, and I have to give it to the narrator that he does show David's flaw. That 7 year absence makes things a little difficult to explain, and it is a political situation. She finds that space where she has to exist. She is not one who looks, focalizes on a thing from a certain point of view. She is one who tries to exist in the focus of the gaze of another. So she remains outside the text. We know so little about her, but what we do know is that she was David's first and third wife. David goes on to have many other wives. Um, we take a look at the location and the transition. We have the situation here where there's literally geographical places where Michal and David are totally not together. We had that first situation where he came to visit Jonathan and did not visit her. Then we have the situation where once she helps him escape out the window, it's a retreat into darkness situation, and then the coming back. The one is enjoying and exuberant, and the other is not. She decides that the male gaze from anyone other than David can be dangerous, which is what society was telling her at the time. But that was the idea of making sure that the location, that the women stayed in the location, stayed in the safe place that they were supposed to stay in. So once David settled back in the palace, he sent for her, and Michal metaphorically remains outside. She stays outside, uh, although she would have loved to have been inside, but the anger now has turned to hate, and she remains outside for the rest of her life. With reference to the other women, Um, she does not attract his attentions enough for her to respond to him because of the situation. Uh, she remains childish, and that childlessness of Michal becomes a thing because children throughout the Bible was something that was shared. Remember, Samuel was one who was prayed for by his mom, Hannah. By his mom. So, what are some of the lessons that we can learn from this story today? What is it that we should remember and keep in our hearts from the character of Michal? Well, one of the things that you have to remember is that there is a situation wherein they have to remember that God has a plan for them, and He chooses those that He wishes to put in the situation. He is not swayed by political power because He controls that. So He manifested that situation in marriage and the sexual excess that was important to the theme of Samuel 1 and 2. He made sure that there was a legal status for Michal, marriage to Patiel. The narrator affirms that neither Saul's right to give Michal to Patiel nor David's right to demand her back was a legitimate argument. The adherence to the policies of the Near Eastern practice regarding missing husbands um, has been historically uh, documented. And as we go through, we see that the narrator solely used her story to make sure that we understood how David went through. Patel is just one of those interesting characters. He seems to be the only real relationship that Michal had in this narrative. He lost that relationship. It was painful and dehumanizing, and especially when he had to return her. And there are 5 ways, given verse 16. Patel is once again described as Michael's husband, and there's the use of two prepositions, which doesn't matter, but it reveals how much he he loved her by walking behind her, providing for her sort of an entourage, which she would have had being technically the queen. He wept for her publicly. He was humiliated when he was told to go away, and he used uh, he used uh, the idea that he was lost to Michal forever, because David, whether it was shame, pride, or I am in power, decided to treat her and Patel as subservient people. Much has been written about David's polygamy, but in either case, it progresses again the storyline and what is going to happen to him in the weeks to come and the years to come. He reigned for 40 years. Um, is there a legacy here? Well, yes, there is. When we did Abigail, we talked about the legacy of marriage and what it should have been. This is a situation where this is what it should not have been. Michal is manipulated by David. She is manipulated by her father. She is loved by one who either adheres to what is said or who refuses to cause confusion. As one of the minor characters in the Bible, she speaks volumes. She speaks volumes regarding how one should be treated. She goes from being a princess, because that's what she is when we start, to a pawn. A pawn meaning someone who is manipulated used for their own reasons. And this is one of the things that happens to her for their own reasons. She's used by her dad, then she's used by then she's used by David. There are so many speculations as to did David want her back or did he take her back because he could? There are really no answers. So the book of Samuel is considered a masterpiece. If we want to talk about the legacy thereof, it has everything. It has the drama in it. It has the tragedy in it. I found no light spots. I say light spots. There was nothing in it to laugh out loud about. But there were things that would and could cause a smile to come on one's face. The idea that a man could take an arranged marriage and make it one of the saddest situations is one that causes you to go, okay, I know out of this household, out of the house of David, out of the covenant of David, Jesus Christ will come. By reading this, it gives us a chance to say, what is messy here can be so much better there. Join me next week as we take a look at First King. May God bless you. Thank you for being with us.